something else now. In a new report by the International Science Council has outlined plausible scenarios for the COVID-19 pandemic to consider the options for achieving the most desirable end to the crisis. According to the report, decisions made over the coming months and years need to be informed not only by short-term priorities, but also by long-term challenges, and will serve as an analytical tool for policymakers to lead to a more optimistic outcome to the pandemic. The lessons in the report outline actions to be taken around an emergency, such as a pandemic, both before and after, as well as beyond the sectors of health. Professor Salim Abdool Karim joins us on the line. He's the president of he's the vice president of the International Science Council for Outreach and Engagement. Good to have you with us again, Professor. I mean, when the pandemic first broke out, when we were told that what we should do, this should be an opportunity for us to do things differently going forward, that we never find ourselves in this situation again. How much of these lessons have we learned?
Good morning, TT, and good morning to all of the listeners. I think the report sets out to look at what's the likely future, what's the likely scenario, and then maps out a high road and a low road. So if we want to go the high road, it's called the collaboration plus scenario. It's really about us beginning to find a way to stand together, because there's no scenario in this world that sees some countries controlling the virus while it's spreading rampantly in others. We have to have some common strategy if we want to get global control of this virus. So the collaboration plus scenario gives us some choices about how to get on that road. The third scenario is the low road. And that scenario is about the missed recovery scenario, where things will deteriorate and things will be much worse than they are now. And we have elements of all of them in the world right now. We have parts of the world that are collaborating with each other. We have parts of the world where they're missing the recovery. We have parts of the world where they're continuing. So the report highlights that we have the ability to choose that future by our decisions that we make today. And if we look at the three key lessons that you've asked me about, then those lessons are, firstly, that this pandemic has highlighted several inequities. Inequities by race, inequities by gender, and inequities between countries, such that wealthy countries, jumped the queue to buy vaccines first, and they hoarded vaccines while, poor countries had to go to the back of the queue. So those inequities have now come to the fore, and there's a bright light shining on them. The second is that as we think about this pandemic and we think about, what have we seen, we have seen incredible contributions by science. New diagnostics within 3 weeks of discovering that there's these cases. We have a new vaccine in less than a year. We have new treatments coming. So all of those reflect the contribution of science. But we need to find more ways and structural ways in which the UN can use those science. And so one of the recommendations is about a science council to enable science to feed into policy. And then finally, that as we think about the future, we have to think about the way in which we're going to have to protect ourselves against new variants, about new viruses that are likely to come in the future. And so our preparedness and taking these lessons forward is going to be very important.
Now, for all the best of policies, Professor, that it does not actually necessarily mean that we will get the best of possible outcomes. I mean, if you look at the fact that, for example, how do you mitigate against the vaccine skepticism that we have seen, and the disinformation around vaccines? I mean, we face a situation here in South Africa where we are sitting on vaccines that now might even expire because the uptake has just not been what was desired.
Yeah, I mean, Titi, it's really and indeed a very sad reflection, as you articulated. You know, the reality is that this is the first pandemic that the world has experienced in the midst of the social media that we have. And what we have found is that in uncurated social media platforms, in other words, where you can say whatever you want in the interest of free speech, that what we are seeing is that people are conjuring up these kinds of conspiracy theories. And these conspiracy theories, you know, people are anxious and they are concerned and they need somebody to blame. So it's helpful that the conspiracy says that, you know, Bill Gates is putting microchips in the vaccines. Whether it's true or not is less relevant for most people, is that they got somebody to blame for their current situation and their anxiety. We've got to find a way around that. And what we have seen mostly is that we've got to find a way for people to rebuild their confidence in government. They've got to have trust. Yeah. If you don't trust, you know, the people who are asking you to do something, you won't do it. So that problem exists not only in South Africa, but in many countries. But we have it quite acutely here. And we've got to rebuild that trust because corruption has been a key factor in destroying that trust between those in power and those who are being led.
And finally, Professor, what do we do to ensure that we have the type of global cooperation that we require to, prevent any future outbreak pandemics that may break out, and where I'm told it's a case of not if but when we are likely to face another, outbreak, pandemic as a result of one or other pathogen there. How do we ensure that we get the levels of cooperation that are required amongst the international community?
Well, I sometimes say, think about it like a Martian coming from Mars, landing on Earth and threatening the world. In that kind of situation, all countries have to stand together against this external threat. You can't have a situation where, two of the biggest economies in the U.S. and China are fighting with each other. You can't have a situation where Russia and Ukraine are at war with each other. That's not how we're going to stand together to fight, an enemy. So we have to find a way to do that. Now, the UN is the mechanism that we already have in place. So in our report, we call for certain reforms in the multilateral system in order to deal with pandemics. And those reforms are about ensuring that we have, for example, a pandemic treaty, one that enables us to act in a way where all countries have already agreed in order to have common strategies, in order to have common approaches, in order for us to be able to move forward as a world, but not as individual countries bickering with each other.
All right, Professor Salim Abdool Karim, as always, thank you so much for your insights. I appreciate your time.
Absolute pleasure. Wonderful to be with you this morning, TT.
He is the Vice President of the International Science Council for Outreach and Engagement.
Power traffic. Thanks, TT.